I was sitting at the desk I had worked at for 11 years when my stepbrother walked in, closed the door behind him, and slid a termination letter across to me with the calm of a man who had already decided how this meeting was going to end. He said my father had made some decisions about the direction of the company and that my role was no longer aligned with that direction. He said it was nothing personal. He actually said that. Nothing personal. I picked up the letter. I read it once. And then I opened my bag and I took out the folder that I had driven to my father's house to collect 3 days earlier, the folder my father had handed me himself, and I placed it on the desk between us. I said, before we continue this conversation, I think you should read what is in here. He looked at the folder, and for the first time since he had walked through that door, his face did something it had not been doing. It went still. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever worked for something your entire adult life, built it quietly and consistently, and with everything you had, only to have someone who arrived recently walk in and act like it already belonged to them? Stay with Alexis's story because the folder she put on that desk did not appear by accident. It was the result of years of watching, waiting, and finally understanding that some battles are not won by being louder. They are won by being earlier. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done when that termination letter slid across the desk? My name is Alexis, and I am going to tell you about the day my stepbrother tried to fire me from the company my father built, and what happened when he found out that the company had never been what he thought it was. I need to start at the beginning because the beginning is where the shape of everything else was set, and I want you to understand who I am and where I came from before I tell you what I did. Not because I need you to like me, but because the story only makes sense if you understand what it meant to me, what the company meant, and why a termination letter slid across a desk by a man who had been in my life for 2 years was the single most clarifying moment I had experienced since my mother died. My father is a man named Gerald. He built a mid-size logistics company over 25 years, starting from a 2-van operation in a rented yard when he was 32 years old. He is 71 now, and the company has 43 employees and a client list that represents most of the regional manufacturers in the area, and a reputation that was built one reliable delivery at a time over a quarter-century. My father is not a flashy man. He is a man who wore the same style of boots to work for 20 years and who knows every one of his drivers by first name and who checks the vehicle maintenance, logs himself on Friday mornings, because he says you cannot trust the safety of a fleet to anyone who does not feel personally responsible for it. I grew up watching him build it. I used to sit in the office after school and do my homework at the corner desk and watch him take calls and review invoices and talk to clients with the particular patience of a man who understood that a reputation takes years to build and seconds to damage. I knew the company before I knew what a company was. It was just the place where my father went, and sometimes where I went with him, and where the smell of diesel and printed paper and strong coffee meant that everything was normal and everything was okay. My mother died when I was 19. She had been ill for 2 years, and her death was not a surprise in the way that some deaths are surprises, but it was still a loss so large that I could not see around it for a long time. My father was devastated in the quiet way that private men are devastated, not loudly, not in a way that asked for management, but in a way that I could see in the set of his shoulders and the extra hours he put in at the yard, and the way he sometimes stood in the kitchen in the morning looking at nothing. I finished my business degree and I went to work at the company. Not because my father asked me to. He had never pressured me. I went because I wanted to, and because I had grown up inside that place, and I understood its rhythms and its problems, and I believed I could help make it stronger. I started in the operations team, not in a management role, in a working role, scheduling and dispatch and client communications, learning the full shape of the business from the inside. I worked there for 11 years. I became the operations director at 31. I know every client, every driver, every contract, every margin, and every problem the company has had in the past decade. My father remarried when I was 27. Her name is Pamela, and she came with a son, Brendan, who was 30 at the time and who had been working in sales at a company in a neighboring city. Pamela was pleasant and I'd not dislike her, though the marriage had arrived quickly enough that I had not fully processed it before it was a fact. I tried to be fair. I tried to be the kind of person who did not hold a remarriage against a parent who had been genuinely lonely for 8 years. I mostly succeeded at that. Brendan was a different matter. He was charming in the immediate way that people are charming when they want something. He had good manners and a quick laugh, and he was good at making people feel like he was paying them particular attention. He was also, from the first meeting, interested in the company in a way that I registered, but did not name correctly at the time. He asked questions about it. He asked about the client structure and the contract terms and the fleet size and the margins. He asked them in the way of someone who was curious, not in the way of someone who was conducting an assessment. But I had grown up watching my father take calls about the business, and I knew what genuine curiosity sounded like and what a different kind of interest sounded like. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself I was being protective in a way that was about my grief and my complicated feelings about the remarriage, and not about anything Brendan had actually done. I told myself to give him the chance I would give anyone. For the first year, he was not involved in the company at all. He stayed in his own job. He was present at family occasions, and he was agreeable, and I found myself relaxing slightly, thinking perhaps I had been reading things into nothing. Then my father had a minor health scare. Nothing catastrophic, a cardiac warning that required a procedure and a period of reduced activity, but it was enough to shift something in the family dynamic. It was enough to introduce the word succession into conversations where it had not been before, and it was enough to give Brendan an opening that I believe he had been patient enough to wait for. He offered to come into the company to help while my father recovered. He framed it as temporary. He said he had some relevant experience and that he could take some of the pressure off while Gerald was resting. My father, who was tired and genuinely needed support, and who had the particular vulnerability of a man who has just been reminded that he is not invincible, said yes. Brendan came in on a Monday morning and he never left. He did not take over immediately. That is important to understand. People who are good at taking things do not grab. They position. They make themselves useful. They build relationships with the people who matter. They create the impression of being indispensable before anyone has asked whether they actually are. Brendan was very good at this. He was warm with the drivers. He learned names and asked about families and remembered details. He was attentive with my father in a way that looked like love and that I cannot prove was not, at least partly. He sat in on client meetings and said the right things and followed up promptly, and the clients responded to him because clients respond to attentiveness. He presented himself as someone who cared about the company's future, and he did it with enough consistency that people around me began to say things like he really seems committed, and Gerald seems happy having him there, and it is good that the company has someone else invested in it. I watched all of this and I kept working. I want to tell you what it felt like from the inside because I think it is important. It was not the dramatic experience that it might sound like from the outside. It was subtle. It was incremental. It was a series of small adjustments that each looked like nothing and only looked like something when you added them up from a distance. Brendan would suggest a change to a process, and my father would approve it, and the change would be implemented in a way that slightly reduced my visibility in the decision. Brendan would take a client call that would normally come to me and handle it and report the outcome to my father before I knew the call had happened. Brendan would be in my father's office when I arrived in the mornings, already there, already in the conversation, so that I was always arriving into something rather than starting something. I was being moved to the edges of the company I had worked in for 11 years, and the movement was so gradual and so politely packaged that naming it felt paranoid. But I was not paranoid. I was watching a pattern, and the pattern had a direction. The clearest sign came about 18 months after Brendan joined. My father called me into his office and told me he was thinking about restructuring the leadership team. He said the company had grown and the structure needed to reflect that growth. He said he was thinking about creating a CEO role and that Brendan had shown real aptitude and commitment. He said he valued everything I had done and that my role would remain important. He used the word important in a way that meant something other than central. I asked my father directly what the restructuring meant for my position. He said I would remain as operations director. He said Brendan would have overall strategic oversight as CEO. He said it was not a reduction in my role, it was an addition of a layer above it. I said I understood. I drove home that evening and I sat in my car outside my flat for 20 minutes before I went inside. I thought about 11 years. I thought about the corner desk where I had done my homework. I thought about the Friday morning fleet checks my father had taught me to do when I was old enough to read a maintenance log. I thought about the clients I had brought in and the contracts I had negotiated and the crises I had managed and the growth I had contributed to. And then I thought about what I actually knew about my father's ownership structure and his succession intentions, and I realized that for all the years I had worked there, I had never had a direct conversation with my father about what happened to the company when he was no longer running it. We had talked around it in the way that people talk around things they are not ready to say directly. But we had never sat down and said the specific words. I decided it was time to have that conversation. I went to my father's house on a Sunday, not the company, his house, where we could talk without the building and the staff and the daily business creating a context that made hard things harder to say. I made him tea and I sat across from him and I said, "Dad, I need to ask you something directly and I need you to answer me directly because I think we have been not saying something for a while and I think it is time to say it." He looked at me with the eyes of a man who had been waiting for this conversation. I asked him what his intentions were for the company. I asked him what happened to it when he was ready to step back. I asked him where I stood in that picture. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that I have thought about many times since. He said, "Alexis, you are the company." He said everything it is, the culture, the reputation, the relationships, the standards, came from what you and I built together. He said he had been watching the past 18 months and he had not liked some of what he had seen. He said he had made some decisions that he was not certain about and that he was still certain about others. He said he needed me to trust him for a little longer. I said how much longer. He said not long. He said he had something he was putting in place. He said when it was done he would tell me everything. I left that Sunday with more questions than I had arrived with, but also with something I had not expected. A sense that my father saw what I saw. That the man who had built this thing from 2 vans and a rented yard had not lost the ability to read a situation clearly, even when the situation involved people he loved. I trusted him. And I waited. 6 weeks later, my father called me on a Wednesday evening. He said he needed me to come to the house the following Saturday. He said he had something to give me. He said to bring nothing, just myself. I went on Saturday morning. He was at the kitchen table with a folder in front of him and a cup of tea that had gone cold. He looked tired, but he also looked like a man who had finished something. He pushed the folder across the table to me. I opened it. Inside was a restructured shareholding agreement for the company. I will not give you every legal detail because some of it is still private, but the shape of it was this. The company had been wholly owned by my father. The restructuring transferred a controlling interest, 51% of the shares, into a trust. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. My father retained 49%. Brendan had no shares, no trust interest, and no ownership stake of any kind. There was also a director's resolution, signed by my father as the sole current director, that named me as co-director with equal signing authority on all company decisions above a specified threshold. And there was a letter, handwritten by my father, that I will not read to you in full because it was private, and it was personal, and it belongs to me. But I will tell you that it said he was sorry it had taken him this long to say clearly what he had always known. It said the company was mine in every way that mattered, and now it was mine in every way that was documented. It said he loved me. It said he was proud of me. It said he was sorry for the 18 months. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. My father refilled my tea. He sat across from me. He said he had also had a conversation with his solicitor about the implications of the restructuring for any future changes to leadership, including the CEO appointment he had discussed with me. He said the co-directorship I now held meant that no significant structural decision on about the company could be made without my agreement. He said that included personnel decisions at the senior level. I said, "Does Brendan know about this?" He said, "Not yet." I said, "When are you going to tell him?" He said he thought that conversation would be more useful after I had had a chance to understand the full picture. He said he had told Brendan that there were some ownership discussions happening and that things might look different soon. He said Brendan had not responded well to that information. I took the folder home. I read every page twice. I called my own solicitor, a woman I had used for a contract matter 2 years earlier, and I asked her to review the documents. She called me back the following Monday and confirmed that the structure was clean and correctly executed, and that my position as trust beneficiary and co-director was fully legally established. I put the folder in my bag and I went to work. 3 days later, Brendan walked into my office and slid the termination letter across my desk. I want to tell you what was going through my mind in the moment between reading the letter and opening my bag. It was not triumph. It was not anger. It was a very particular kind of clarity that I have only felt a few times in my life. The clarity of a person who has been waiting for a moment and recognizes it when it arrives. The clarity of someone who has the right document in the right place at the right time and understands exactly what that means. I opened my bag. I took out the folder. I placed it on the desk. I said, "Before we continue this conversation, I think you should read what is in here." Brendan looked at the folder with the expression of a man who expected the contents to be something manageable. He opened it. He read the first page. His face changed. He turned to the second page. The stillness I mentioned when I described his face in the hook, that stillness was not just surprise. It was the specific stillness of a person whose entire working model of a situation has just been replaced by a different one. He had walked into that room as a CEO delivering a termination. He was now sitting across from a co-director and the majority trust beneficiary of the company he had just attempted to restructure without her knowledge or consent. He looked up at me. I said, "I think there are some things we need to discuss." He said, "Where did this come from?" I said, "From my father." I said it had been executed 6 days ago. I said I had had it reviewed by my solicitor and the structure was sound. He said my father had not told him about this. I said, "I know." He said, "This changes things." I said, "Yes." I said it changes quite a lot of things. I want to tell you what happened next because the next part is where Brendan showed me who he was more clearly than anything he had done in the previous 2 years. He tried to negotiate. Not immediately. First, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he thought we had always had a good working relationship and that this did not need to be adversarial. He said he hoped we could find a way to move forward together that worked for everyone. He said his mother, meaning Pamela, was involved in this family now and that she would be affected by any conflict. He said my father was not in perfect health and that stress was not good for him. I noticed each of those moves. The appeal to the working relationship we had never actually had. The reframing of a legal document as potential conflict. The introduction of his mother as a pressure point. The mention of my father's health as a subtle implication that I should be careful about upsetting him. I said I agreed that it did not need to be adversarial. I said I thought the most sensible thing was for us to have a full conversation with my father present, with both of our solicitors available if needed, to go through the current structure and understand what it meant for the company's operations going forward. He said he would prefer to handle things between the two of us first. I said I understood that preference. I said I did not share it. I called my father that evening. I told him what had happened. I told him about the termination letter. I told him about the conversation afterward. My father was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I did not expect. He said he had known Brendan would make a move when he sensed the ground shifting. He said he had not known it would be this fast or this direct. He said he was sorry I had had to sit across from that letter. I said I was not sorry. I said I had been ready. He said I know you were. He said that is why I gave you the folder first. The meeting with both solicitors happened the following week. My father attended. Brendan attended with a solicitor who had clearly been briefed quickly and who spent most of the meeting reading documents rather than arguing with them, which is what solicitors do when the documents are clean and the position is clear. The structure was confirmed. My co-directorship was confirmed. The shareholding trust was confirmed. The CEO appointment that Brendan had been operating under was reviewed, and it emerged that it had never been formally documented as a board resolution, which meant it had been a title without the legal underpinning that would have made it binding. Brendan had been calling himself CEO for 4 months without a board resolution to support it. I did not say anything when that came out. I did not need to. The practical outcome of the meeting was this. Brendan's involvement in the company was restructured into a defined consultancy role with a specific scope and a specific term. He was no longer involved in strategic decisions. He no longer had access to the client relationships I managed. He no longer attended the Friday morning fleet checks that my father and I had reinstated as a joint practice in the weeks after the shareholding transfer. He did not leave the family. He is still Pamela's son, and Pamela is still my father's wife, and I have made my peace with that because it is not a battle I need to fight, and because my father's happiness in his personal life is separate from my position in the company. But the version of Brendan that had been gradually occupying the space I had built over 11 years was gone. The company had its shape back. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with my father about 2 months after everything had settled, because it is the part of the story I think about most. We were doing the Friday morning fleet check together, just the two of us walking the yard the way we had always done, and my father said something that I want to give you exactly. He said, Alexis, I want you to know that I never forgot what you built here. He said there was a period where I let other things cloud my judgment, and I am not proud of it. He said the cardiac scare had made him feel like he needed to move faster than was wise, and that he had made a decision about Brendan that he had second-guessed from the moment he made it. He said the Sunday you came to my house and asked me directly was the Sunday I understood what I needed to do. I said I had been afraid to ask for a long time. He said I know. He said you should not have had to be. I said I forgave him, not because the 18 months had not been real or had not cost me something. They had. But because my father is a man who built something honest over 25 years and who made one significant mistake under pressure and who corrected it as fully as it was possible to correct it. Forgiveness in that context is not weakness. It is just accurate. I want to tell you what the company looks like now because the now is important. I am the co-director and the majority trust beneficiary, and in practice, I run the operations in the way I have always run them, with the addition of the strategic authority I should have had sooner. My father comes in 3 mornings a week, and he does the Friday fleet check with me, and he drinks his coffee, and he talks to the drivers, and he is happy in the way that men are happy when they can see that what they built is going to outlast them in good hands. We have grown the client list by 6 accounts in the past year. We have added 2 vehicles to the fleet. We are in conversation about expanding into an adjacent county. I am doing this work the way I have always done it, by showing up and being reliable and treating the reputation of the company as something that belongs to everyone inside it and must be protected by all of them every day. Brendan's consultancy term ended after 6 months and was not renewed. I made that decision. My father supported it. Pamela was not happy, but she did not argue with it publicly, and my father handled that conversation privately, and I was not present for it, and do not need to know the details of it. What I know is that the boundary held. There were people at the company who had not known the full picture during the 18 months and who had, in some cases, built working relationships with Brendan that they had to renegotiate once the structure changed. Some of those conversations were awkward. I had them anyway, directly and without drama, and in every case the person I was speaking to adjusted to the reality quickly once the reality was clear. People adapt to truth faster than we think they will. It is the ambiguity that takes the longest to navigate. I want to say something to anyone who is in the position I was in during those 18 months. The position of watching someone slowly occupy the space you built, of feeling the edges of your own role compress, of telling yourself that naming what you see would make you the difficult one. You are not the difficult one. Seeing clearly is not a flaw. Naming what you see is not aggression. Asking for the direct conversation is not an attack. It is the most straightforward thing you can do for a relationship that has been living in the space between what is being and what is actually happening. I waited too long to ask my father the direct question, not because I was weak. I do not think I was weak, but because I was afraid of the answer and because I had told myself that good things were worth protecting through patience. They are worth protecting, but patience that is indefinite is not patience. It is avoidance. And avoidance serves the people who are counting on your silence more than it serves you. The folder in my bag was not luck. It was the product of 11 years of work and a Sunday morning conversation that I was afraid to have and had anyway. That is all. No magic. No drama. Just the willingness to ask the direct question and to act on the answer. Brendan slid that termination letter across my desk, and he had already decided how the meeting was going to end. But I had been in that building since I was a child doing homework at a corner desk. I had watched my father build it, and I had helped him build it, and I had continued building it when he needed me to. I knew every person in that yard by name. I knew every client by the particular thing they needed that we had been giving them reliably for years. He slid a letter across a desk. I put a folder on top of it. That is all it took, because the work had already been done, long before he walked in that door, and the company is still here, still running, still mine. Alexis did not argue when the termination letter landed on her desk. She did not raise her voice or make accusations or demand explanations. She reached into her bag and put a folder on the table and let 11 years of documented, legally secured work speak for itself. If this story hit something real in you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever watched someone slowly occupy a space that you built, move by small move, and told yourself you were imagining it? Have you ever been afraid to ask the direct question because you were not sure you could handle the answer? Tell me what moment in this story hit you hardest. And if you are in the middle of your own version of those 18 months right now, I hope Alexis's story reminds you that the direct question, asked at the right time, to the right person, is not a risk. It is the only move that actually works.